So my name is Bruce Newman. I'm the president of LexRap. I took over from the esteemed Marianne Boswell about a year ago. So I'm going to talk a few minutes about who we are and what we do. And Michelle, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, who's going to be talking very specifically about the migrants in Massachusetts issue. And then we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A afterwards. So LexRap is a group of volunteers. We have no paid staff. We are a 501c3. And we work with people who have been forced to leave their homes for reasons of violence or political turmoil, all kinds of things. And they arrive somewhere in this area and somehow fall into our tribe. We call ourselves a tribe. And what we do is a little different for every person or family, but basically we're holding their hands while they adjust to living to life in the U.S. I looked up the number again. I have to, every time I do one of these, I have to sort of try to remember. There's 114 million displaced people worldwide. That's 114 million people who felt enough fear for their lives that they walked away from their home with a backpack and a duffel. And these are the people that we want to help when they show up in the Lexington or the Lexington area. So they carry a certain amount of trauma from the fact of having to leave, from the journey. Some people spend years in a refugee camp. We had an asylum seeker who didn't even know about asylum. She arrived in the United States and for about 6 months was bouncing around from one bad situation to another before somebody finally said, oh, you could apply for asylum and that's going to be your route. And then there's the migrants many of whom walked the length of Mexico. So they arrive with the pain of having left their homes and everything, and the journey that brought them here. So part of our job is just to look them in the eye and say, you are safe. We are here to help. You're okay now. What we do for each family is very different according to what they need. Some people come with pretty decent English. Some people show up with zero English. Some people have kids who need to start the schools, but some of the kids were in refugee camps for many years and are behind, not just in English or in the subjects here, but they're behind in their own language. So we find tutors. We find tutors for the adults. I was thinking before about a gentleman by the name of Tim who arrived here from Jamaica. He'd grown up on a farm, went to a school. I think he had to walk about 1.5 miles or 2 miles. He got there was 40 people in the class, and the teacher, if he was late because he had to feed the chickens, the teacher would beat him. He got home, and his parents didn't have any particular use for study or degree, so they weren't encouraging him. So Tim arrived illiterate. He spoke English. English is the consolidating language in Jamaica. And we found a tutor who spent 2 days a week. She came for about 4 or 5 months and sat down with Tim and taught him how to read. We help with job education. We've had several people come into our fold who decided they wanted to become nurses. LexRap paid for some prerequisites, In a couple of cases, gave them no-interest loans to help pay for the education. We helped hold their hands through that first registration at Bunker Hill Community College, because one of the big things, if you're new to the country, is bureaucracy. Now, every country has their own bureaucracy, but can you imagine arriving here and having to deal with the healthcare system? Finding a doctor, making an appointment, changing it, figuring out where to go. How about the Registry of Motor Vehicles? Who here likes dealing with the Registry of Vehicles? There's any number of things where it's just incomprehensible if you have just arrived. And so our job is helping hold their hands through that. Here's how you do this. And our goal certainly is independence and autonomy. For the first 6 months to a year, I think we veer a little bit towards, let me hold your hand, because there's such a significant piece of helping them feel welcome and safe. We don't have to push the autonomy part. So we help with job training. We have conversations with people, helping them to figure out what the next thing they're going to do is. We fund job training. We pay for kids' summer camp. We pay for kids' driver ed. Trying to think of all the things we do.
All that stuff.
What?
All that stuff.
All of that stuff. Currently we have 2 families that are of particular weight and concern. One is a family that has just recently arrived from Uganda. They have filed for asylum. So one of the funny things about asylum is it takes years, but when you apply for asylum, it's 5 months before you can get a work authorization. So basically the United States is saying, you can stay here, but you can't work. Where do they live?
If you wanted to know, but here it is.
Is this working? Does this help?
Straight on.
Does this help?
Yes.
Okay. So number one thing with this new family is finding housing, free housing, because they have no money. So we think we've cobbled together a month with one family and 2 months with another family. And what happens this fall, we're not sure yet, but that's down the road a little bit. They're going to need money for food, because again, they can't work, they have no money, they've lost all their savings. And then he'll need help figuring out what he's going to do for work. There's another woman who's been here for a few years who was working, was injured on the job quite badly, and over the last couple of years has not managed to have pain reduction. So she's living with pain, she's not working, she's living on disability, and it's not enough. So we're in regular dialogue with her, trying to figure out what's the next step for you. So some of the things are joyful. There is joy in this work. And some of it is really head scratching and hand holding, and how can we help? So the LexRap model for the 8 years that we've been around has been to take on 1 or 2 families at a time, work with them over a period of 2, 3, even 5 years if need be. So when we started hearing about migrants arriving in hotels in the area. We initially thought, well, that's not what we do really. We don't wade into a big place where there's 200 people. And we sat back for a little while and kept thinking and finally said, we can't not help. And right about that time, 30 families arrived at a shelter in Lexington. So that was an obvious fit for us, but it also was a much bigger task and job than LexRap was prepared to do. People started reaching out to me as president of LexRap saying, what are we going to do? And started some initial conversations with the people from that church, this organization. And what evolved was what we call the Lex Sheltered Coalition, which is a much larger group than LexRap, has a bunch of LexRap people in it, but a whole bunch of other people. There's a bunch of people who have been very involved here tonight. And so we kind of figured out how to support 30 families in a shelter. So that was very different. At this point, there is an agency that's taken over. So the work as a coalition is much reduced, but one of the things I really wanted to emphasize is in this work, you build relationships. And we have built relationships with the people at the hotel, and we're not going to walk away any more than we're going to walk away from your friend. So we intend to stay involved. And I think the last thing I wanted to say about the work, which has become more clear to me through the work in the hotel, is I start out talking about the things we do. We help with driving, we help with tutoring, we help with finding housing, blah, blah, blah. There's the thing that's really important underneath it all, is this sense of helping people feel welcome. And that's what has been so obvious over the 6 months of working in the hotel, is this group of people, they see us and they smile. And they say, hi. And on WhatsApp, they say, we love you, Justine. It's just a really wonderful feeling to feel like we have contributed to them moving from scared people, it's like, oh my God, what the heck is going on, to there's a wonderful group of people around here who respect me and see me and are willing to help. So we'll have question and answers later, and I'll be here, and when we get to it, I'll point to some other LexRap people here. But at this point, I want to turn it over to Michele Ciccolo, our state representative, and she's going to talk a bit more about the migrant crisis and how the state's dealing with it.
Thank you, Bruce. And thank you to LexRap and Lex Sheltered Coalition for all you're doing, and every one of the volunteers here in this room. You guys are making a profound difference, and I am really grateful to you for your work. I'm also grateful to all of you just for being here tonight, to be interested in this topic. This is a tough issue to discuss. It's one that brings a lot of contention and anger and concern and confusion and worry, and it's one that doesn't have simple answers. Immigration is one of the most complex issues at the federal level, and as a state elected official, I have very little to do with what Congress does and what the president does to make our rules and create our programs that govern the numbers of people that come into this country and how we manage the borders, for instance. So they set the policy framework, and at the state, it's up to us to figure out what to do with the framework that we're operating within. So, and among things that we do have some control over is the state's right to shelter law, which has come under some criticism in recent years. But I want to mention that that is a law that's been in place since 1983, more than 40 years. And over that period of time, this is the first time in that 4-decade law that there's been any problems with it. And I would argue in many cases that it's something that we should be extremely proud of, because we as a state have chosen to be welcoming and to embrace the people that are here in a humane and generous way to help people that are wanting to get a start in this country and put them on the proper footing, much as many of our families were helped when they came from abroad, wherever they came from generations ago. Some of us have come recently, and some of us have been here for multiple generations. But we all got help when we got here, one way or another. There's no way that we didn't have family or friends. You know, our predecessors were certainly helped along the way. There are also other places in the country that do have right to shelter rules. It's a kind of a misnomer that Massachusetts is the only place. Chicago, Illinois, for instance, has a Homeless Rights Act, and they guarantee a 60-day shelter stay. And New York City has a more limited 30-day shelter stay, which also is in effect. And there are probably other places. I am not an expert in nationwide immigration laws. In fact, this is an area that I really did not know a lot about until more recently. I should mention that as the representative for the 15th Middlesex District, my district encompasses most of Lexington, a large piece of Woburn, and a very small slice of Winchester, and this is my third term. And like all of you, I'm learning about this crisis that we're facing and trying to figure out what we can do to make things better and how we can respond in a reasonable and responsible way that is supportive and moves people in the right direction. So Massachusetts is generally seen as one of the most generous states with respect to how we treat our homeless families. And I think it's something we should be proud of. I think that the generosity that we bestow on newcomers when they're desperate is something that will ultimately be paid back to us in loyalty and gratitude from the residents that we help along the way. Also think it's important that we understand that the right to shelter law in Massachusetts is only for families and women with children. It's not a guaranteed right to everybody. Some people think it should be, but in any case, it is limited. And in the most recent supplemental budget that we passed in the state, recognizing the drain on the resources that the law does impact on our state budget resources, we moved to shorten the length of stay to 9 months, a very controversial move for some folks. Some people think we should never have done that. Other folks think we should have shortened it more. We also, because of the governor's executive action, have the program capped now at 7,500 families, which really represents the capacity that we have as a Commonwealth to support these sheltered families. We're really out of space in our hotels and in our shelters, and that is about as much as we can handle. The legislature, unhappy with the cap that the governor was proposing, insisted that she create an overflow system so that we would not have people sleeping in parks and in airports and out on the street. And she has responded by opening up a series of overflow shelters, as they're called. But I think it's also important to appreciate that of those 75 families that we have capacity to help, that only represents about 0.3% of all the families in Massachusetts. There are 2.7 million households in Massachusetts. So people are seeing this as a crisis, and rightly so. But it is also a very small piece of the population that's in our Commonwealth, and a very small piece of the things that we worry about every day when we look at our resources and our state budget and the things that are our priorities and things that we want to be emphasizing. It's also important to note that 50% of the residents in our shelters are Massachusetts residents. They're not all foreign born. They're not all recent arrivals. They're our neighbors. They're people who have been priced out by a very pricey housing market in Massachusetts, and a number of other things that have driven the cost of living up very high in the state and elsewhere. So I think that's important to keep in context. I also think it's important to understand and know that everyone in our shelters, per our regulations and our rules, has to be here with some form of legal status. They are not, they come with one of 3 different categories that they may be classified under. Refugees are folks who apply outside the country. Now I'm speaking only of foreign-born folks in our shelter system, not the Massachusetts residents that have been displaced and are homeless for other reasons. Refugees have to apply outside the country, and it can take about 2 years to approve the refugee status. But if they're granted this status, they have the immediate right to work in the U.S. once they arrive, and after a 1-year stay, they can commence the process of applying for citizenship and a permanent green card. The rates are capped by the federal government and limited by not only the numbers that are allotted for people coming from various different countries, but also really by the federal government's capacity to process the applications. This is one of the things that was really disappointing in Congress's recent failure to act with immigration reform, is that we desperately need additional resources for administrative support to process applications, to vet potential refugees and asylum seekers, to hold hearings, to adjudicate, to follow the process through in a thoughtful way. And without the funding and the resources for that, things are slower, which encourages more illegal crossings of borders because we're not properly processing the applications that are coming to us. The other category of folks that are here are asylum seekers, or some call them asylees. They present themselves at any one of our borders, and they have to make a credible claim because of political, religious persecution, danger, fear of bodily harm, natural disaster, famine, displacement, whatever the reasons that are legitimate. They have to make a credible claim, and if their claim is considered credible, they're allowed into the country with a court date when they have to appear to begin their application process for proper asylum. Many are turned away at this point. I was looking at some numbers recently, and we're seeing massive. December saw the largest number of crossings at the border. I think it was 250,000, which is an outrageous number in terms of what we have not seen numbers like that in a long time. But January, we saw that drop in half, which was also very interesting. Many of those people are turned back. About half of them are not given asylum status and sent back. They're just immediately rejected, which I think is interesting. The third category of folks that might be living in our shelters that are foreign-born are humanitarian parolees. I hate this word because when we say parolee, people think of prison parolees, and they have the wrong idea. Humanitarian parolees are only allowed in for a temporary stay, up to 2 years. That's the maximum. And it's assumed that many of them may go back to their country when the unrest in their country settles down. And they have to be from one of only 5 countries in order to actually apply for the status. Those countries are Ukraine, Venezuela, Afghanistan, Cuba, and Haiti. Not surprising that it's these countries in particular. So here we sort of begin to see why we're experiencing a real swell of immigration right now and what's going on. If you walk back the clock a little, when President Biden took office in the middle of a pandemic, we had shut down most of our borders. Most countries had forbidden travel. There was very restricted and limited movement. So immigration was at an all-time slow, largely due to the pandemic, but also the prior administration. And one of the president's promises was that he would get us fully out of Afghanistan and withdraw all the U.S. troops, which is one of the first things that he did when he took office. So we saw the crisis in Afghanistan when the Taliban took over, and that made that country one of the countries that allows people to be eligible for humanitarian parolee status. And then in 2021, Haiti had another major earthquake, and its president was assassinated. Tremendous unrest in that country. Then the war in Ukraine broke out. So there's just a tremendous amount of unrest going on. And of course, with Cuba being a communist country and an authoritative regime, they've always been a country that we tend to accept their refugees. And Venezuela, to quote the U.S. Institute for Peace, Venezuela is in the midst of an unprecedented social and humanitarian collapse, the result of bad economic policies and political conflict that has led to food insecurity, the second largest migration crisis in the world, and regional instability. So you can see why these countries are also on the list. And between 2012 and 2021, less than a decade, there was a 109% increase from 42 million to 89.3 million in people forcibly displaced and or living in places experiencing high or medium intense conflicts. So the amount of conflict in the world has just risen, and that is what's causing so much migration and so much unrest. So how does this all relate to what we are seeing here in Massachusetts and in Lexington in particular? Folks know, and Bruce talked about this, that there are 30 families living in a shelter in Lexington at the hotel. And we are expecting about 55 families to come to Lexington, to the Lexington Armory, which is being established as an overflow shelter. I got to tour that facility today and see what that was going to be like. And I have to say, I walked away wanting to cry, because the people who are coming are so desperate to get out of where they are at that they're willing to live on a cot in a large cavernous room with 175 people sleeping under one roof for the chance at a better life in this great country. And I find that very inspiring. I find that exciting that people around the world still believe in the American dream. And I find it exciting that we as a community are one of the best communities to go to, as evidenced of what LexRap and LexSheltered folks have done. I've never been so proud and impressed with my community. You all responded with immediacy. You responded with care and concern. You showed up. You did the hard work. You rolled up your sleeves. You brought donations. You did whatever it would take to make those people feel welcome and to close the gaps in their needs. When I observed the English language learners class going on last week, I couldn't get over how many volunteers were there in the room and how many people were here learning English from our residents. It made me tremendously proud, and it gives me hope for what we can do as a state and as a country if more communities respond like Lexington did. So the majority of the families here in Lexington are coming from Haiti, although there are folks from Uganda and Ukraine, I think, I'm not sure anymore, Venezuela, some families from Venezuela. And people ask me, well, why are they coming from Haiti? For the same reasons that our forefathers and foremothers came to this country and located in the cities and states they went to. They went to where they knew family or friends already, where they had a connection. They didn't come here because we have an overly permissive right to shelter law. They came because there were people who could help them in their immediate network. And it's also very interesting to note that most of them have saved up their money for a flight and they're coming in on a plane. 2/3 of the people coming in are coming into Logan and having paid for their own flight, saved every single penny they had just to get here. The other third borrow the money from family or friends. It is not the case that most of them are getting a flight from the governor of Texas or Florida. That happened a bit and it made major headlines, but the truth is really most people are saving their money at a chance to come to here to make a better life. Has anybody here been to Haiti? Has anybody here been to Haiti? So I went to Haiti once when I was in college with campus ministry. It was a short mission of a little over a week, and we worked in an orphanage and a medical clinic, and I've never seen anything like it. There were open sewers up and down the streets of Port-au-Prince. People lived in these huts that had cardboard and old hoods from cars tacked together to try to create a shelter to keep the rain off them. It was so disease-ridden in terms of the lack of sanitary options, and yet the people there were so vibrant and so helping. There was a transportation system where they would just push over and make sure everybody could get on what was called a tap-tap, or a camionette, I think it was. The vans are camionettes, and the pickup trucks fitted out to be their transit system are called tap-taps. And they would make room for you. They would absolutely make sure that everybody could get to where they needed to go. The spirit of the Haitians is just amazing. And I am just, again, profoundly impressed that they will go through the effort to come here to start a better life. So, what else can I tell you? I'm getting to the end of my comments before we have Q&A, but so some statewide numbers. How many families are in the system? Right now, 7,462 families as of May 2nd. And again, that's out of 2.7 million households in Massachusetts. So it's a very small fraction of households that we are supporting in our shelter system. So there is a higher percentage of the folks coming in to our overflow shelters that are not from Massachusetts, as we're seeing the swell of folks coming from abroad. And we are on track to spend, right now, as of May 2nd, we've spent $5.64 million to date, and we're on track to spend about $932 million per fiscal year. That's what it's costing us, and that is an exorbitant amount of money. But also for context, it's important to note that that's less than 1% of the state budget. I know, we have a big state budget, but we have a lot of needs and a lot of wealth in this state, and we provide tremendously good services to our residents. It's also important to realize what we get out of it, aside from the awesome relationships that we can build with our refugees and asylum seekers. It's also incredibly important and good for our economy. If we didn't have immigration, Massachusetts would have lost a congressional seat in the last census. We are a state with a low birth rate and a declining birth weight and net outmigration in some cases. And if it weren't for immigration, we would actually be at a significant loss. We also have a tremendous need for workers. How many people know what the unemployment rate is right now?
Nationwide, 4%.
Nationwide, it's 4%, you said? Does anybody know what a healthy unemployment rate is?
6 or 7%.
Somewhere between 3 to 5, maybe. Massachusetts' unemployment rate right now is 2.9%. We are desperate for workers. Let me say that again, desperate. I sit in hearings all the time where we're talking about our inability to get nurses, our inability to get home health care workers, our inability to get daycare workers, our inability to get dental hygienists, mechanics, electricians, and plumbers, and it goes on and on and on. We have a large population of baby boomers and seniors aging out of the workforce, and a lot of people who need to be taken care of. And immigrants have a profoundly positive impact on our economy. 23% of the self-employed residents in Massachusetts are business owners that are immigrants. And they generate $2.3 billion in business income, at least according to the 2018 data that I have here. A quarter of all new US businesses are founded by immigrants nationwide. There have been reports by the National Bureau of Economic Research that says that immigration had a positive and significant effect on low-wage workers between 2000 and 2019, and no significant impact on college-educated workers. And the most recent projections suggest that that will continue, that trend will be even more positive. So there's lots more I could probably say. A little bit more about the jobs and the lack of availability. In Massachusetts, according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Massachusetts has 48 available workers for every 100 open jobs. So there's a serious shortage. We have the 6th highest worker shortage in the country. 72% of Massachusetts human service providers report that it's become increasingly more challenging to fill jobs. 58% of early childhood educators report staffing shortages in a survey in January 2024. It goes on and on. Anyway, the point is that they are valuable members of our community. They're here, and if we do right by them, it'll only be to our benefit. And so I guess with that, I will stop and allow for questions.
I just want to say one more thing building on that. Michelle is focused on the need for jobs, but our experience, particularly with the migrants in the hotel, is these are a bunch of people that, despite what they've been through, are for the most part, have a tremendous optimism and enthusiasm, and they're just great people to hang out with. So knowing that migration is a fraught subject, I wanted to give a couple of guidelines for Q&A discussion. Please wait to be called on. Don't interrupt somebody who's speaking. Please, no side conversations. Speak as you would like to be spoken to. No demeaning comments or stereotyping. Speak about your experience or concerns, not what others have experienced. And you can share facts and you can share opinions. Don't present opinions as fact. So, we'll just at this point, we'll open it up. And if it's something specific to LexRap or Lex Coalition, I'll field it. If it's more of a state response, in the back.
Can you speak to whether they're refugees or asylum seekers, where they're going to be, where are they going to go to live when we want them to be able to work, they want to be able to work, and we have such a terrible crisis in housing?
Thank you for that excellent question. That is the big question of the day, is how are we going to solve our housing crisis? And one of the ways that we get out of the housing crisis is to build more housing. There have been a series of policies we've passed, and something that I support wholeheartedly is the MBTA zoning law. But that's going to take a while before it does its work and allows for new development. We are also about to pass one of the largest housing bond bills that we've ever approved, to allow for borrowing to invest in development of new housing, to invest in affordable housing, to provide more vouchers. There's a whole wide range of strategies, including speeding up the rate at which we refurbish units in public housing so that they don't sit empty for very long. But I would also say that one of our strategies needs to be what they do in other countries, more of a co-housing scenario. And it's something I'm extremely excited about. And we have Amy Mitchell here, who's an expert on this, and I am not an expert on it. But I've been talking with folks about the need to consider, we have families who can't afford their mortgages or are finding it hard to make ends meet. And they want to put their kids in daycare maybe so they can work, but they can't afford the daycare. There are so many opportunities. There are seniors who really need some light housekeeping, or maybe they need some cooking done or errands run. And they have all these empty rooms because their kids have long since grown up and left the house, but they want to stay in their home. There are so many scenarios where we see the human service worker need. There's a great opportunity to pair up new families or unhoused families with families that are overhoused and bring down the cost for everyone, but also close the gap for those social needs that are going unmet. There's also a crisis in loneliness. And the opportunity to have more co-housing, I think, is where we need to go next. We can't completely build our way out of the housing crisis, and we do need to continue to be aggressive about strategies to address affordable housing, to make it more affordable for everyone. The legislation that we passed at the beginning of this legislative session had a whole series of tax credits for families and low-income earners that would make it a little bit easier to live in the Massachusetts area. But that is not the only solution, right? That's just a small piece of what can help close the gap for some families. I think we need to look at creative ways to put people together and share resources. So thank you for that question.
I'd add one little thing, which is, and Ingrid's here, I think she can verify this. The town of Lexington passed something that allows in-law apartments, right?
We've had that for years.
So that's another possibility. So, yeah, go ahead.
I would love to know more about the co-housing, because I was just about to ask that, and you brought it up already, anticipated that question. And like, what are the policy levers that we have in Massachusetts? Is it an individual town thing, or is this a state legislative thing that would allow this?
I think it's going to need to be new legislation, because if the government tries to match families up, there's all kinds of liability issues there potentially that could be very difficult to navigate. We have to make sure that first, that unhoused families are not preyed on or taken advantage of. We have to make sure that privacy concerns of frail elders or small children, families with children, are also protected very carefully. We also have to have an exit strategy. We have very strong tenants' rights in the Commonwealth, which are terrific, and they're there for good reason. But if you want to invite someone into your home and it's not working out, I think you ought to be able to ask that family to leave if it's not working out. And so we actually have to figure out legislatively how to create sort of a contract scenario where if it's not working appropriately, that the family could be asked to leave with, you know, some reasonable notice, whether it's 30, 60 days, whatever, maybe even 90 days, but it can't be, you have to go to housing court to get this family out, because no one would take anybody in if they had to go over a hurdle like that. And I think if the government's going to do it, we probably ought to support it financially like we do with foster children. We actually, the money follows the foster child to the family that is the host family, and we need to consider some kinds of payments like that, which I think will be far less costly than what we are doing now, but also not without its complexity. So it has to be designed very carefully. So I'm riffing on this, and Amy's been writing a whole policy on this. But I do think it needs legislation and it needs funding, or it has to be done by private nonprofits in a matching service.
Job fairs, are those being organized to, if we can't get a hotel full of refugees to a single employer, can we have the employers who need workers come and we say, hey, we've got families here, talk to them?
Great idea, and yes, we are doing that. So the Healy administration's done a great job doing, first of all, signing up new incoming residents to get work authorization permits. That is something that they're accelerating really quickly, which is very helpful, but also the Department of Workforce and Labor has ramped up its training programs and its matching programs to get businesses to be able to come in and you know, make their jobs available and known to the new residents or the unhoused residents.
Is there a job board that they're posted to? How do they get mass hire? Okay, I'm sorry.
Lots of good resources on the Mass Hire website and others, but it's a great question. Thank you.
How does this getting people to work fit in with what we have experienced with asylum seekers not being allowed to work for 6 months? How does that, it doesn't seem like it makes sense.
It doesn't. And that's one of the problems that Congress needs to fix. They need to accelerate the timeline so that people can work sooner. So depending on your status, if you're coming in as a refugee, you get to work from day one. If you're coming in as a temporary humanitarian parolee, you can also work from day one, but you can't stay more than 2 years. If you're an asylum seeker, you have to wait quite a long time for your application to be processed. And there we need more administrative support to process them faster. And we need Congress to change the rules to allow them to work sooner. So that is something we all have to lobby for at the federal level. And what we're doing at the state level is trying to work with our partners in the federal government to accelerate or make those connections administratively so they can happen faster. Hosting forums, bringing in legal service aides to help folks who process applications to assist with the paperwork and the bureaucracy to make it happen faster.
What about the transportation angle, getting people from locations like this hotel to the jobs that they can potentially fill? It seems like a great incentive to do something about our transportation.
You're throwing me up a softball because you know I love to talk about transportation. But absolutely, the transportation system is a mess, and we have quite a ways to go to address what needs to happen there. The human service agencies that are working with the sheltered facilities, the sheltered families, are arranging limited transportation, but it's not nearly enough. And in some cases, the shelters are in places where there aren't even bus routes. You know, there's over 80 communities in the Commonwealth hosting shelters right now. So it is spread throughout the state. It's not just in eastern Massachusetts, it's wherever there are available facilities that can house people. So transportation is a huge issue, and it's going to become the next crisis that we have to deal with come next session. You know,
Can we get the business community to privately pay for vans and small buses or whatever to transport people to?
in some cases they do, but they need to do more of it. And I think we as citizens need to encourage our businesses to do more, you know, to stay engaged, to participate in the conversations about how to make transportation better. It's like the third rail, literally and figuratively, transportation, when you talk about new revenues and the need for revenue. But you saw how we had a big brouhaha when the Secretary of Transportation a few weeks ago made some comments about where new revenue might come from, and it caused a tremendous amount of pushback. But we have to have these hard conversations. We're going to lose the gas tax as we electrify our vehicles. And transportation is 42% of emissions in the Commonwealth. And so if we're going to meet any of our climate goals, transportation has to be the number one issue we focus on, even more so than electrifying and putting up solar panels and all those things. So the transportation system needs an overhaul in terms of how we fund it. And keeping in mind the new residents that are here that can't afford cars, or the young people that don't want to drive cars, thinking about our more vulnerable residents and how they're going to get around the Commonwealth is a really important part of the consideration of how we fix the transportation system.
I'll just add one piece to that. Hope nobody from the town is here.
On camera.
The LexPress, one of the LexPress buses used to stop at the hotel, which is the shelter, and they changed the route a few years ago, and we lobbied several times to have the LexPress route restored, to no avail. So that was a big disappointment.
Keep trying.
I'm curious about with the overflow shelter, will the LexRap model of engagement and the marketing be something that will dovetail with the overflow shelter, or it's a different model?
We've been told that the shelter.
Question because he couldn't hear the
Oh, the person was asking about if volunteers will be involved in the overflow shelter, and the answer for the immediate future is no. The state has engaged an agency that's going to be there 24/7, has primary authority and responsibility for helping those people, and they have said very clearly it's going to be a closed shelter and nobody's allowed in. Will that change over a period of time? I don't know.
I put in a good word this morning. I put in a good word for the volunteers this morning and mentioned some of the things that I thought you all might be able to help with. And they said, they wrote it down, they said they'd keep it in mind and they'd communicate that to the provider of the human service provider there. So there's a little bit of hope.
Mary?
I'm just wondering, you're saying that there's a 9-month policy for them to stay housed. What happens after 9 months? You just say bye? You're on your own?
So that is untested. As of right now, there are opportunities for 2 extensions under certain circumstances. Pregnant mother, there's a few other reasons why you could get a 3-month extension, and you can do that for up to 2 3-month periods. I think we're going to have to see what the situation is on the ground in 9 months after this has played out. And right now, we're working as hard as we can, at least the administration is, to find permanent housing for people, to match people up, to get them into better situations, to help them get jobs so they can move out and pay for their own housing. And what happens then? Well, some of them will move back to doubling up with friends and family that they know in the area who might have sponsored them initially when they came. We certainly don't want them out on our streets. And if we end up as a Commonwealth with people out on our streets, I think we're going to have to reassess the policy.
I'll just add a little. The agency, which has just recently taken over the shelter in Lexington, part of their very clear mandate is helping people find jobs and find housing and move them out of the shelter. So are they going to be successful in 9 months? That's $1 million question, but it's a very clear mandate for them.
Can you
Dan?
clarify when the 9-month clock starts?
Did you hear that?
The question is, when does the 9-month clock start? Well, at first we heard it was going to be immediate, and then we heard it was going to be retroactive. I think the answer is that it is retroactive. And then you hear another story when the next time you turn around. So, good question, and I'm still waiting for clarification on that myself. What have you heard lately?
So we have a weekly meeting where a few of us from the coalition meet with people from the town and the state. And this came up, and our primary state contact said it's not going to be retroactive, meaning that this 9-month clock starts either when the bill was passed or sometime around now. It seemed a little vague, so I wrote, oh, I know, there was something in the paper contradicting that. So I wrote back to the state contact, and then I wrote to Michelle, and I said, which is it? And I got 2 different answers. So the truth is, we don't know. Marianne?
So when someone comes here as a humanitarian parolee, they can apply for asylum. And my understanding is they still have a right to work. They don't then all of a sudden get imposed upon them a 5-month waiting period. However, there is a real shortage of legal help. And a lot of the people, of the 74,000, right, people who are here, are going to apply for asylum. And there aren't enough immigration lawyers at all in the state to help with that, and certainly no help from the federal government on solving that problem. Is that being talked about?
Yes, we're very well aware of the need for more legal services and legal aid, and we've been beefing up the state budget for a couple of years in a row to increase the funding that's going out to some of the organizations that provide those services. So we are definitely trying to recruit more folks into that area and fund it more aggressively, because we recognize that it's not just in the unhoused people that need the help legally, but it's also tenants. That, you know, if we can keep people from losing their existing apartments, that's going to keep them out of the shelter system as well. So there's an opportunity there to try to work through conflict instead of having situations that create homelessness. So we have been funding those accounts and supporting the organizations that do the work.
The New York, I believe it's the city shelter system, has Girl Scout Troop 6000. They specifically deal with unhoused kids in the shelter system. They put them together in troops, sell cookies, but also, I don't know what the equivalent merit badges are. If we need socializing, integration, and English practice, can we get a statewide shelter troop started? Either Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, I'm not.
Put you on that.
Scouts.
Let me go see what I can do.
Such a great idea.
Right?
Great idea. I love it.
Could you repeat it? I couldn't hear.
So the question is, so in New York City, or in, they have a Girl Scout troop that is a group of Girl Scouts from the shelter?
Yes, all the girls are shelter residents.
And they are working together to, improve their social outcomes and to sell cookies and do service projects, and I think that's wonderful. It's really terrific.
So starting the troop. Do you want to do my troop?
So another hand, Pat.
So it sounds as though the general tenor on the legislative floors is fairly positive about this, even though suddenly we have a X billion-dollar thing that we didn't have before. Has there been a lot of controversy about all of this that you hear?
It's going to be the number one issue this campaign season for many districts that are purple. No question about it. And right now, we're not feeling the pain of the impact on the budget because we had one-time resources and some of our accounts left over from the pandemic era, stabilization accounts. So the money has been coming from there. But next year, if we don't see growth in the state tax revenues, then it's going to be starting to crowd out other things that are, high priorities. That said, we've spent quite a few years building up our reserves. And this may be a good time to use those reserves so that we can keep our policy priorities and our programs whole. Justine.
Go ahead.
Another question. I'm remembering what you were saying. You were going over the various unemployment stats we have here, and like just the workforce shortages. And like, what are the things that we can do to alleviate hiring? Like, I know there are also like licensing fees, or what it takes, the professional boards and different things that people have to do in order to get whatever professional license. I mean, are there different levers to? I know those are there to protect. And make sure service is good and service providers are qualified. But I also wonder, are those barriers to employment? Like the fact that people are also migrating out, it's not just the housing, right? It's also like the cost of being able to do business in Massachusetts as a single source. And like, are there legislative efforts to try to make it easier and lower those barriers to entry so we can keep people here working?
Yes, I think this is an area that is, again, not my area of expertise, but something that we have to address, and that there are committees that are looking at these very issues, especially because we took a close look at some of these issues during COVID, when we had to change the way certain licenses and organizations operated, for instance, allowing telehealth and things like that. But the issue of getting foreign trained doctors who are here certified is a really difficult issue because we have stringent rules, and other states have begun doing a better job addressing it than Massachusetts has to date. And so that's an area that we can take a close look at, because some of our migrants are coming here with tremendous skills, and we want to be able to put those to our advantage and let them flourish as well and use the career that they were trained in. So I think we are certainly looking at it. It's not an area that I know a lot about, but something I'm keeping an eye on.
LexRap has a client, if you will, who was an OBGYN in his original country and has not been able to work as a doctor. He's talking about moving to Tennessee because he can get a residency with pretty quick turnaround. Well, Marianne can talk about this.
The states that have changed their legislation have changed it by saying that international medical grads who have passed the 3 tests that you would have to pass to get a medical residency can do an internship and work for 2 years with a licensed physician, and then they are licensed. Almost all of the states that have passed this legislation are states that have banned abortion and have an exodus of doctors. So it's fascinating. But Massachusetts, I have heard, is considering a similar legislation because we do have a shortage of physicians, and what we would hopefully get is a 2-year internship and then a commitment for 2 years of working in an underserved community. So this is something that has been discussed.
So there is a legislative effort here in Massachusetts?
I have heard that there is discussion. I do not know how, and I asked Michele this.
I can also speak to nursing, and I don't know when the nursing board passed this, but one of our clients was a nurse and was the head nurse in a hospital in her town, and will be allowed to work here. She had to get all of her training approved by the nursing board, and they somehow managed to lose everything.
and she had to spend a lot of money that she didn't have to get it brought over again from a country that's in civil war and where people's daily lives are just traveling from A to B are in peril. She might manage to do that. And then she will have to pass the same test that every registered nurse has to pass here, which is called the influx. Once she does that, she's eligible to work here, and that's very different than the doctor situation. I don't know if it was brought about because of the pandemic and this massive, massive exodus of nurses and shortage of nurses that we have right now. Or it may have been before, I don't know.
I'm curious about how the state is thinking about education and English language. We amazingly have expert tutors with LexRap, and Bonnie is like our leader, and it's all volunteer. But that is the biggest barrier to moving forward with any of these projects. So, you know, living with another family, that's hard if you can't communicate about subtleties. We have people that, you know, there are jobs, human service jobs. I've reached out and, well, you know, to work with disabled people, elderly, you need to be able to have that basic communication. So I was laughing because I think the kids are okay. They're going to school, they have an after-school program, they are being welcomed, at least here, and, you know, paid professionals working with them, but the so far the shelter system is not addressing English because it's a housing system. So the the agencies that are in charge of the shelters are not, their mandate is not English.
Right.
And so we have this, you know, great, huge group. You know, is there any thinking about how to accelerate that for, you know, if we have our 30 families that are coming along, but they could still use more practice also. You know, virtually, not ideal, but better than nothing, you know.
So that's a tough question to answer because right now the system is too siloed, right? And I know that the legislature has and continues to fund ESL programs and supports nonprofit groups that provide these services, but it's the administration that runs DESE, and it's the administration that is running the shelter system, and we do need to continue to lobby them to think more comprehensively and holistically. I think that initially, when they were full-on in crisis, when this started to unfold, their focus was exclusively on finding places to put people. Safe, and you know, today's tour, the most of the emphasis of what they spoke to us about was about safety. How they were going to operate the shelter safely, which I'm grateful for. But I wanted to hear more about how are you going to help these people. We were not meeting with the human service provider this morning. We were meeting with the National Guard folks and the folks setting up the shelter. So my next meeting, once the human service organization is on site, will be to talk with them about how they're going to address language barriers and provide a more holistic experience for people to be truly able to enter society and function fully. But it is an area that we need to keep pushing on. There's very rarely.
They're going to be on site like immediately, right? Because we know that.
Yep. Move-in is May 20th.
This may sound sort of trivial, but are the people coming to the armory, the clients who are going to be living there, are they going to be greeted by people dressed in National Guard uniforms? Which would be incredibly traumatic.
It's not a trivial question. It's an important question. I was wondering those same things today. I think the Human Service Agency is going to be more prevalent in the welcoming experience. A lot of the families coming initially are being moved from the Melnia Cass facility as they need to transition that facility to its summer use because it's the public pool that is so desperately needed in that part of the city. So I think that many of these residents have seen the National Guard folks and know that they are friendly. And the folks I met with today really emphasized what great relationships they have with the sheltered residents that they know. And that they interact very positively with them. That was at least what they were describing.
The National Guard, the Guard, not the Human Services Agency.
Yeah, National Guard.
They were aware that the uniforms are off-putting. They are trying to keep the operations separate and distinct, including entering from different doors, so it was not going to be traumatic for residents.
Do you think we could do something at least like kids making cards and you could bring them, not us, or like something welcome to Lexington? I wonder what sort of warm welcome we can do without being actually physically
I'm
there.
sure that would be allowed. I'm sure that would be fine.
She hasn't asked a question yet.
I'm just wondering, are the residents going to be allowed out? I know people aren't allowed in, but are they?
Yes. So the question was, are the residents allowed out? Absolutely. Because it is an active National Guard facility, the security is important in terms of controlling who comes and goes. And so the only people who can go in are registered residents that are staying there. But they are certainly allowed to go wherever they want during the day. If they're going out for job interviews, if they want to go downtown, if they want to take a bus, that's all things that they're allowed to do. They just have to check in through the front control point.
So I'm just wondering if we can do something to help them when they're outside.
We could invite them to a party. Why don't we throw them a party at the depot or something?
The related question is, have they learned how to use the T? Do they have a Charlie card? So it's nice if they can walk out of the armory, but do they have any clue how to get anywhere?
Maybe you could just sit like down the driveway, a little sign.
Today, we talked about crosswalks and pedestrian access, and I was grateful that the town upgraded the intersection at the jug handle at Hartwell Ave, because there's all pedestrian controls, because if they're taking buses back and forth, they need to be able to cross that very busy four-lane road. So I physically sort of inspected the pedestrian route all the way to downtown as I was driving away, realizing, yes, the crosswalks are all in place. They need a little bit of paint in a few places, but they certainly can navigate on foot.
It's still not great for the elders and Bedford Street. It's a high crash.
I know. Yep, yep,
Not.
yep.
Will the school-age children start in Lexington, or will they take them back to where they've been in school? Because it's just a McKinney-Vento.
We discussed that at
Usually it's
length
a
today.
parent's option.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so they can do either. They can continue going back to their original school, or they can start here. We were a little unhappy that they couldn't just wait to move the families until the end of the school year, but there's an issue with getting the pool up and running for the summer and needing to get the facility ready for that activity, and so they needed the families to be moved sooner. But they're also cognizant of the fact that they may not register new, so the shelter will not be filled entirely with people coming from the Melnia Cass facility. I think a third of the residents will be from that facility, but then the rest will be new overflow shelter residents. And they were considering, because this is overflow, and we need to get them into regular shelter facilities, because they're on a wait list for the regular shelter facility, that when they're not going to be encouraged to register for school until they know where that regular shelter facility is, because it may not be here in Lexington, it may be someplace else, and they don't want to get into a situation where they're busing kids back and forth. So they're going to wait until the very end of the summer to register any of the kids that are in the shelter.
But if they're coming in May, they wouldn't go to school for those months?
No, they'll go to school, but they can make a choice again in September as to where to register. So they can either sign back up here or sign back up where they were, but more importantly, if there's a plan to transition them to a regular shelter,
Right.
out of the overflow shelter, then they'll be encouraged to register wherever that regular shelter is.
I also point out the last number that I heard for the waiting list was almost 1,000 people waiting to get into an EA shelter.
Do you have any information about the makeup of the
people that are gonna be in the overflow shelter, like how many are children, how many are families? Do you have any
I'm
sense
not hearing
about-
very well. Did you hear it?
She asked the makeup of the people coming into the shelter system. Well, they're all families, people with children, or they wouldn't be eligible. It seems, we don't have great data because it's changing constantly, but I would say like 40% kids? Or are you experiencing less?
Justine, would you?
I was just looking at my data. I'll get back to you in 1 second.
And the question was about the overflow shelter.
The overflow shelters as
The reason
well.
I ask is the impact on the schools, the
Right.
impact on, you know, just in terms of the kinds of activities that you want to engage,
Yep,
make available to those, those residents.
yep.
I'm not sure that the National Guard is thinking about that.
They're probably not. That's why there's a human service organization that's really focused on those details, and we're
There's one
grateful.
elementary school that probably serves that area.
Right,
In the EA shelter, it's basically half our school age or under. That's
Right.
Big numbers under 5. Roughly half of the population.
go ahead.
So we've heard about some of the overflow shelters where people are required to leave during the day and then come back in the evening. I trust that's not the situation at the armory.
They didn't speak to us of that issue today, and I didn't think to ask the question, but I did ask about the HVAC systems and whether or not it was going to be tolerable, and they are upgrading all of that, so there's going to be air conditioning and ventilation, and they're going to upgrade the boiler for the winter. I don't think that they're going to require them to leave. That's not what the impression we got, but, so,
The Dane site, so where they have, like, the courthouse, like, something has to happen there from 9 to 5, or like Logan Airport, like, terminal has to be open, and so they have all of the families at Logan Airport leave for the day, and then they can come out at night. I wouldn't think that the armory is going to do that.
yeah, I don't think they
I'd be
will.
surprised.
I'm still wondering about the express stop. Is that a dead letter, or is that anything that you can continue to work on?
You could certainly write to the Transportation Committee if that's something that you wanted to see advanced, and to the Select Board. It is very difficult to change a Lexpress route because the timing is, they're on a cycle and have to make certain loops within the half hour, or the whole system gets thrown off. So if you want to add a stop someplace that doesn't exist right now, you have to remove a stop, and that also can cause problems with people who are already relying on the bus service. So it's a little tricky than just, I'd love to see our system be more demand responsive and flexible, but it has not been in the past. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to advocate to make the system more demand responsive. I personally think we'd be better off running the buses on shorter routes more frequently and let people walk from the neighborhoods to the major roads. Run them on the busy streets, and, make them free and run them every 10 minutes. But LexMedia, cut that piece out for me.
So,
Somebody else.
He's got a hand up too.
hang on a second. Fairly shortly, I want to call a close to the question and answer, so that I'm going to have all the LexRap board people stand up, and people can ask have some individual conversations if you want. But Pat was pointing to somebody over
A
here.
couple of hands too.
Oh,
Are there any bills coming up or problems where anger could be directed productively?
Where anger can be directed productively?
Productively?
I guess it depends on what you're angry about. And then
Is Bill X03 that would give them more money at the shelters? I'm giving a made-up example. Is there anything that we should be keeping an eye on or looking out for going forward?
Well, I would say take a look at the final Senate budget and and write to the conference committee if you feel the numbers for the budget aren't what they should be. The members of the conference committee will be assigned shortly, after the process is getting to the next step. And we have to pass the budget by July 31st at the latest, if not sooner. Usually much sooner, so that if there's any governor's vetoes, that we can consider whether we want to override those or not. So this is when it's all happening. The budget really is unfolding, and so there's a whole page on the state's website that deals with the budget, and you could take a look at the status of different line items, and you can see who the conferees are when they're appointed to the conference committee.
But you would not encourage angry calls to the governor just yet? That's,
No, I mean, you know, you might be angry that the House and Senate put less money in the shelter system than the governor asked for, but we did that because we wanted to have more accountability, and we wanted to have more of a plan for what happens next. And we recognize that when we run out of money, which is inevitable at the pace we're going, that we'll have to put more money into the system. And the chairs of Ways and Means in both the House and Senate more or less acknowledge that this is really, we're parsing the money out slowly rather than giving a big lump sum, because we want to have productive conversations about how we're going to handle the situation. So you could be angry at that, I suppose, and take it in a vacuum that our number's lower than the governor's number, but there's a reason for it. So I don't know.
not yet. Okay.
Not yet, I'm sorry.
All right, I'm going to say this is the last question.
I just wanted to say that the word immigration is being said to be one of the absolute pivotal presidential issues, and understanding, as outlined by Bruce and Michelle, the difference between refugees, asylum seekers, and immigrants who are walking across the border is really helpful when you have discussions between now and November. And because the word immigration is used to cover all of it, and it's not. You know, if you think about just refugees, when Obama left office that year, we took in 111,000 refugees, which means they applied while they were in another country and coming to the States. At the end of Trump's term, we took in 11,000. This year, we're on target to take in 165 refugees. Again, nothing to do with the border, but people don't understand that. And helping people understand really would be helpful.
And I'm just going to add to that, don't assume that your neighbors are in favor of legal immigration or supporting any of the systems we're talking about. I'm a little surprised at how folks on both sides of the political divide are very, very upset about this issue. I've had lots of family members pull me aside and shout at me that we got to close the border, and you know, just surprising responses from people who I would normally think of as being more welcoming and open-minded. And so I think it's important to keep talking about it. I think it's important to really, I think, frame it in the context of how great immigration has made this country, and that how this is what America is about, and this is where we draw our strength. And if we don't want to be a country in decline that's shrinking with a lower birth rate, we need to have immigration. The baby boom generation was the largest generation in history. It is now being surpassed by the current generation. What are we calling them now? Gen Z, Gen X, but this series of generations because of the immigrants that have joined our ranks, and that is what's making us stronger, and we really need them to fill the jobs and to support a vibrant, healthy economy. So I think it's really important to talk about that and cast it in a positive light.
So, yes, thank you, Michelle.